Daniel Pomerantz, who lectures at Bar-Ilan University and the IDC in Herzliya on international law, serves as both CEO and legal correspondent to the NGO Honest Reporting. He said in a briefing hosted by Media Central that the decision by the ICC endangers not only Israel, but all countries.
The reality here is that this decision by the ICC fundamentally changes the very nature of international law in a way that poses serious harm to our future as a planet that cooperates for the good of all humanity. And that is something that every country should be very concerned about. In this case, Israel is not a party to the Rome Statute, which means that Israel has not agreed to the rules of the Rome Statute, nor to the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. The United States also has not agreed to it. In this case, the International Criminal Court has decided, and this is very unusual in international law, that it has the power to enforce the rules of the Rome Statute on any country and any individual on earth, regardless of whether that country has agreed to be a part of the Rome Statute or not. That is a very severe situation. Right, so you might be saying to yourself, okay, just because a country didn't sign on to the Rome Statute, does that mean countries should be able to get away with war crimes simply by not agreeing to treaties? And of course not. And there are mechanisms for that. For one thing, there is the UN Security Council, which can pass what's called a Section 7 resolution, which has the force of international law. It was that sort of a resolution that created the invasion of Iraq in 1991, after Iraq had invaded Kuwait. In this case, there's also the Oslo Accords themselves, which govern the relationship between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, and specifically say that neither party should take unilateral steps on the international stage, but to work through the Oslo Accords itself. So there are mechanisms for dealing with a bad actor on the world stage other than applying a treaty to that actor, even though that actor never agreed to it. And why does this matter? Well, we saw a number of years ago that there were some countries in the world that tried to apply universal jurisdiction to Israel, and Israeli leaders were unable to leave the country for fear of being arrested in places presumably as friendly as Spain or the United Kingdom. Now we could have a situation where any Israeli who's ever served in the army in any capacity, even as a cook, any Israeli who's ever lived in the wrong part of Jerusalem could, even a civilian, could be arrested and brought to trial at The Hague and sentenced to up to 30 years in prison for being a war criminal. Now, the topic for today is not whether the underlying prosecution, not whether what The Hague is accusing Israel of is in fact a war crime, but whether The Hague should exercise that jurisdiction at all. The result of exercising jurisdiction over parties that didn't agree to it is that it will have a chilling effect on the world's desire to cooperate internationally and to create institutions that can be used effectively to bring about peace and stability in our world. I'll just point out this as a technical matter, and Israel is not a signatory to the Rome Statute, but the argument brought by Palestine is that because Israel's actions occurred within the sovereign territory of Palestine, therefore Israel can be prosecuted under the Rome Statute. Now, whether Palestine is a state, whether Palestine has sovereign territory, are all issues that were contested by the judges panel. 2 judges ruled in favor, and Judge Kovacs ruled against and addressed the reason why all of those are not the case. But that's not what I want to address. What I want to address is, even if we were to assume that by the ICC's own rules, it can exercise jurisdiction over Israel because the activities in question occurred within Palestinian territory, and Palestine is a signatory to the Rome Convention. Assuming all of that is true under the ICC's own rules, the question is, where does the ICC get the right to create those rules in the first place? Where do a certain number of nations get the power and authority to create a treaty among themselves and then apply the rules of that treaty to every country on earth, whether those countries have agreed to it or not? That constitutes a fundamental change in the very nature of international law, and I believe takes us a terrible step backwards from the principles on which international law was originally conceived.